What's the single worst decision that's ever been made in the course of human history? 1. The Xhosa people listening to their prophet, a teenage girl, who told them to kill all of their cattle and that the spirits would provide for them. 75% of their population starved to death. They blamed the few who didn't kill their cattle for the spirits not providing for them. 2. Well, that certainly is a good example. 3. In 1212 we had a similar event in Europe where child prophets convinced a bunch of other kids to march to Jerusalem. A lot of them got sold into slavery along the way. Edit. Apparently the slavery part is not confirmed. A lot just died going over the Alps, settled along the way or returned home. 4. There's a highly fictionalized book about this which was one of my favorites as a kid. In the book the Children's Crusade was actually ploy by two slavers who convinced a shepherd boy that he saw visions of God, and that boy then convinced hundreds of children to join him on a march to Jerusalem. The plan was to have them reach the Mediterranean Sea, wait for the sea to magically part, like in the Bible. When that doesn't happen, convince them that God sent ships to take them to the holy city, and promptly sell the children on the slave markets. 5. The Thea Beckman book? Crusade in Jeans or something like that. I loved that one. 6. Remember when a German hermit preacher convinced thousands and thousands of peasants to march to the Holy Land to fight the Turks, only to be brutally slaughtered basically as soon as they entered Anatolia? 7. Ironically, this is what made the other crusade successful. The First Crusade was so bad that the local leaders completely dismissed messages from when the Second Crusade, led by Godfrey of Bouillon, made up of noblemen princes who were actually armed and had professional soldiers with them, started taking over towns at an alarming rate. They considered crusades to be nothing more than unarmed peasants being a nuisance. By the time the Anatolian leaders realized that the Second Crusade was the real deal and they were actually being invaded by an actual army this time, they lost a lot of time, and the siege of Nicaea was won by the Crusaders basically uncontested, because no relief force was sent. 8. I heard Godfrey of Bouillon was good at taking stock of a situation. 9. Still not the least successful crusade, though. 10. Are you referring to one where they struck out for Jerusalem, but ended up looting their ally Constantinople? 11. Oh, that one was very successful, for the Venetians. They might have regretted it when fighting the Ottomans, but that was a few centuries later. 12. Wow, I looked this up expecting it to be a one-time event in a small region or village. It took place over 4 years. They killed 400,000 cows, and 40,000 starved to death. 13. 4 years, they killed 400,000 cows, and 40,000 starved to death. That's an unnerving amount of fours. 14. It's a bad omen in Chinese because it sounds like their word for death. 15. Can confirm. Pronounced the same, with a different tone. In countries with a sizable Chinese community, mostly in Asia, houses that have the number 4 on them, think 4, 44, 404, 414 etc., usually end up getting sold for less than normal numbered homes, and much less than prosperous numbered homes with the number 8 in them, think 8, 88, apartment on the 8th floor, etc. 16. I had to look this up. A key bit about the story is that lung disease was killing their cattle, which was part of the rationale for the killings. It wasn't a completely random decision. 17. It's interesting, because that's actually how modern us farmers deal with diseases that escape the antibody cocktail most use. They call the herd, flock, harvest, etc. They just know they'll probably be able to restock from somewhere else. The Xhosa had the same train of thought, but believed that new cattle and grain would just appear out of thin air. 18. Do we know what happened to the prophet? 19. She chilled on a farm and died from old age, in her 50s at that point. 20. Specifically, the British took her in. They were probably grateful to her because she completely decimated the Xhosa anti-colonial resistance. 21. Xhosa. This sounds horribly tragic. I have never heard of it before. Is there a good source for information about it? 22. In the 13th century, the head of the Khwarezm Empire learned from an envoy that a peaceful trade delegation from a neighboring empire had been killed and robbed by a local governor. The envoy asked that justice be done. The leader of Khwarezm decided that this foreign ambassador didn't need to be listened to, and so killed him and sent his head in a basket back to the leader of the neighboring empire. That leader was Genghis Khan. Because of that decision to breach this most basic of diplomatic protocols, the Khan turned his attention away from China and cast his eyes westward. His armies and help followed. Without this one decision, it is arguable that the Mongols never move west, and the modern world as we know it is unrecognizable. 23. TL. Doctor version of what happened next. The Khwarezmian Empire, at the time the greatest power in the Muslim world, is conquered in only 2 years. The Khwarezm dynasty is completely wiped out. The last member kept fleeing the Mongols for 11 years, fighting the Mongols and the Seljuks of Rum, and was eventually killed by some highwaymen. Merv, at the time probably the largest city in the world, was completely slaughtered. Genghis Khan ordered his soldiers to kill every single person in the city, and the amount of dead was somewhere between 700,000 and 1.3 million, depending on source. Total of 10 to 15 million Khwarezmians dead. Some sources claim that Genghis had a river diverted through the birthplace of the Khwarezm Shah, erasing it from the map. 24. I've read about this before, but every time I come across it I am just absolutely flabbergasted by it. 25. This is the first time I've come across this. It's insane that Genghis was casually deleting actual empires during his reign. 26. He diverted the Amu Darya and basically decimated Urgench. It never really recovered, but it chugged along for a couple of centuries, very greatly reduced in size and prestige. I visited the site around 5 years ago. It's now called Koni Urgench in Turkmenistan. The destruction of Merv was a great tragedy. It's a great place to do a day tour though, just imagining how it used to be before the Mongols. Since it was right smack in the middle of the Silk Road, Merv was a cultural and religious melting pot. 27. No one can know for certain, but if that never happened, there is a good chance the Middle East would be ruling the world today. The repercussions of what Genghis Khan did are still seen today. Doctor, don't be a dick. The Mongols would sack a city and leave. Eventually the survivors would crawl out of their hidey holes. The Mongols would then send an army back to the city some days later to kill anyone left. 28. Genghis Khan, and I took that personally. 29. Wow. This is really fascinating and is pretty much perfectly what Op was asking for. Totally gonna look into this ordeal some more, thanks for the knowledge. 30. There are so many good what-ifs related to the Mongols. My favorite as a Westerner, Subutai had smashed an alliance of powerful European states of the era, and was poised to conquer all of Europe in the same way the Mongols had conquered China. There were no armies on the continent left who could realistically have stopped him. However, when Ogidi, the great Khan after Genghis, died, the Mongol princes all returned to the steppe to elect a new Khan, which ended up splintering the empire, and the Mongols never returned to Europe. Had Ogidi not died when he did, the history of Europe might have been very different. 31. A Mongol Europe would have been utterly wild. Imagine the entirety of Eurasia under one tyrant. It'd definitely break apart not long after due to infighting and lack of ability to quickly communicate across Earth's literal largest continent. But who's to say the breakups wouldn't have led to a geopolitical map completely and entirely different from what we have today? Huge alternate history potential in this. 32. Was this the event where Genghis razed the guy's village, then had a fucking river diverted through it so that it would never be rebuilt? 33. Replace village with metropolis, and yeah, that's the one. 34. I feel so dumb I had to read it a few times to understand what happened. 35. Same. If I understand it correctly. Country 1 sent peaceful envoy to Country 2 to trade. Local governor in Country 2 killed envoy from Country 1. Country 1 sent an ambassador to Country 2's leader asking for justice. Country 2's leader sent head of ambassador back to Country 1 basically saying, too bad so sad. Country 1 said fine and killed off Country 2's entire dynasty. Country 1's leader is Genghis Khan. 36. I think 5 needs a little embellishment. Killed every living thing in the largest city in the country, burned every structure to the ground, and diverted a river to wash away the evidence. 37. One idiot changed the course of human history with one action. 38. Mao Zedong ordered Chinese peasants to kill sparrows because he believed they ate crop, thus hurting grain production of China. Without sparrows, nothing kept the smaller bugs and insects in check, and they ate all the crops. Famine ensued. 39. There was another famine, maybe the same? Caused by encouraging farmers to build their own iron foundries to promote steel production and thence industrialization. Farmers complied, cutting down trees everywhere to feed the furnaces and neglecting to grow enough food. The environmental devastation wrought led to widespread famine where millions died. And to top it off, the steel produced was of such low quality as to be useless. I think it was 1958. Heard about it on Economics Explained YouTube channel. 40. This period is known as the Great Leap Forward. Mao wanted to increase steel production. So peasants were told to smelt their pots to forge steel in their backyards on homemade furnaces. There were so many ridiculous, hilarious and tragic policies at the time, including one scientist telling people to eat some algae because it produced most biomass for least energy. Turns out humans can't digest this, and the algae farms spread cholera. 41. Also, this genius that convinced the USSR that they could grow crop in snow, hopped over the border and convinced Mao of the same. Hilarity ensues. And by hilarity, I mean a lot of starvation. 42. Oh, this guy is hilarious. He applied communist principles to plant growth. Not farming. Plant growth. He had the farmers plant crops as closely together as possible because they would be stronger in a collective. Starvation followed. 43. They also melted all their farming tools to try and meet the ridiculous quotas, all to create crap steel bars that were almost useless. 44. Do not forget the other half of this. As the famine began to set in, Mao had the laborers tend the farms. In other words, the folks who should have been working the steel mills were farming, and the folks who should have been farming were working the steel mills. They were working right next to each other, and Mao did not realize they should swap jobs. 45. Wasn't it something like, we're going to beat us steel production by giving everyone a steel quota? So all the farmers had to build a kiln in their backyard and do Iron Age level steel CBA to look it up, but I remember that's what we were told in high school history class lol. 46. The steel produced was of very low quality and basically unusable. 47. A similar thing happened in USSR with their biotech industry in its infancy. The party decided that Mendelian genetics was too bougie, so it was rejected and replaced with the already debunked Lamarckian genetics. For example, instead of selectively breeding crops that survived cold weather in order to create a cold weather resistant breed, they simply froze the seeds and hoped that prepared the plants that would eventually sprout from the seeds for the cold. Millions died. Sorry if I screwed up some details. It's all off the top of my head. 48. Yeah, Trofim Lysenko. He didn't just fuck up the USSR. They also exported his shitty ideas to Mao in China after he took over there. That's another reason for the massive fucking famines in China, besides the Four Pests campaign. 49. Listening to a podcast on this, there were more factors. Unorthodox planting methods, rampant corruption, continuing to export during shortage to maintain face. Yeah, Mao starved his people, but his idiocy ran deeper than just one idea. 50. Yay, it's a shitshow all round. But this was to me the dumbest singular decision, very much attributable to one person. Mind you, Mao grew up on a farm. He definitely should have known better. 51. Classic politician not listening to the scientists. 52. I think he purged all the scientists who told the truth. 53. Classic politician getting rid of people that don't agree. 54. I forgot his name in most of the story, but the guy who threw the doctor who suggested washing their hands before surgery in a psych ward probably set back the medical world a couple decades. 55. Ignac Semelwe. A lot of women and newborns died due to them not washing their hands. He proved by washing his hands brought death rates drastically down, but they thought he was mad. Dr. Mike has a video explaining it here. 56. And the disturbing thing about it is that the surgeons and doctors were going back and forth from the morgue to the maternity ward to cause these deaths. A lot of the pushback has got to have been sheer jealousy that the one guy with such high survival rates had an incredibly simple solution. 57. He wasn't committed for it, but rather the reactions led to his mental breakdown and committing. By the way, the full story still casts a pessimistic shadow, but not in the way that you think, and not in a way that hagiographizes Semelwe. The reason that no one listened to him was because he was rude and insensitive, with a superiority complex only a few steps lower than Isaac Newton. Because of his reputation, he was disregarded. The shadow this casts over human nature is that the average human is too stupid to see the idea and not the man uttering it. He told me to wash my hands, but I don't want to listen to a jerk like him. Ad hominem is built into our brains. 58. Haven't seen it, so here goes. The sugar industry convincing American that the real dietary villain was fat, not sugar. 59. And the British. It does my nut in that it's so hard to find yogurt that isn't fat-free. 60. I buy yogurt with extra fat and not only is it fucking delicious, but I could eat the whole gigantic tub and still be a little under my daily calorie needs. I love it. 61. Don't buy yogurt in those little cups. I buy the big containers of whole milk yogurt and mix in my own fruit and nuts. 62. The decision to use leaded gasoline. 63. Thomas Midgley Jr. Not only was he the main man responsible for adding lead to gas, he also developed CFCs, aka Freon, which gases destroyed a good part of the ozone layer. So, I'm thinking this guy's parents should have just decided to skip sex that night. 64. If it makes you feel any better, he at least managed to take himself out in an incredibly stupid, spectacular way. He contracted polio, which rendered him severely disabled. So he devised a system of ropes and pulleys so he could lift himself out of his bed, which he ended up becoming entangled in and fatally strangled himself. 65. Rumored to be a suicide. I love this line from an article in the Smithsonian about him. According to the Inventors Hall of Fame, of which he is also an inductee, the scientist who originally trained as an engineer held a total of 117 patents, many of which didn't kill anybody. 66. Thomas Midgley Jr. is considered to be the single most damaging person to the planet ever. Leaded gasoline and Freon lead to some of the worst environmental disasters we have ever had. Leaded gasoline decreased the world's average IQ by several points, and the invention of CFCs lead to the hole in the ozone layer. 67. That makes me feel the opposite of better. 68. I can't believe it's not better. 69. I clicked this expecting to see jokes and dumb answers, but this one is actually it. 70. Infinite scroll. 71. I remember when DeviantArt introduced that many years ago. They didn't have a button to start it, so the infinite scrolling started automatically. The problem is that they had put a lot of links buttons at the bottom of the page, and not moved them away when they added the infinite scroll, including the button to report issues like that, and some other buttons which were good for normal use. Took over a month to fix it by adding a show more button to start the infinite scrolling. Always wondered if that was because no one could report the problem to them. Ha! 72. Shit, this is a good one. 73. Asa Raskin, the creator of Infinite Scroll, feels guilty for inventing it. 74. Yeah, it's a cool idea but crazy to think of how many brains have been altered because of it. I guess he was like, hell yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah, hell no, oh god no, oh god why. 75. What would happen if every scroll-based medium labeled social media had a set cap on how long you could scroll down before you had to wait for a bit? 76. People would stop using that service and switch to one with no such limitations, because human brains aren't as complex as we like to pretend, and we like flooding them with the feel-good juices too much to hinder the process in any way. 77. Rage and destruction. Lags rarely made people think, oh cool, I'll wait. 78. Not pursuing any criminal charges against the perpetrators of the 2008 banking crisis. Not only did they get away with it, they even gave themselves bonuses after it happened. Meanwhile, the effects of the crisis have shaped the political landscape of the last 15 years, Brexit, Trump, etc., etc. I have absolutely no doubt that they will continue to fuck us again with complete impunity. 79. One of the reasons the middle class is suffering is that trillions in taxpayer money was used to pay bets from bankers, bad gambling and fraud. Should the banks have been propped up? Probably. But they should have been put in receivership, the entire C-suite and board fired, and all discretionary pay for these assets clawed back. Then chop the big banks up and sell them off. Iceland got this right. 80. Do what they did to the car companies? Bail them out but force them to sell minority ownership stakes to the government that they are required to buy back before returning to profitability. The US government came out way ahead on that deal. 81. The decision by Stalin to install Trofim Lysenko as a leading agricultural scientist in the Soviet Union. His theories about farming ruined Soviet production for decades, while they assured leadership that production was so high they needed to increase the government's share in order to ensure there wasn't spoilage. His techniques were also taken and used by the early CCCP, leading to yet more famine and devastation. Overall, Lysenko and his theories could be held responsible for north of 50 million deaths by starvation. I can't name a bigger murderer as far as I know. 82. invading Russia in the winter, or expecting the invasion to be over by winter. 83. Hitler and Napoleon both invaded in June. The problem was expecting it to be over. 84. Should have invaded in April. Should have summoned the spirit of Genghis Khan. He would have done the trick. 85. Hitler got wrapped up in Cyprus and Greece, which delayed things. He had a stupid general that got sidetracked as well by attacking Leningrad instead of going directly to Moscow. Germany was forced to attack Russia when it did because it was running out of oil and needed oil from the oil fields in the Caucasus. Stalin knew that at some point they would come for the oil, but he thought it would happen later than it did. Up to that point, Russia was feeding Germany oil but trying to limit it to prevent Germany from getting out of hand. 86. I think you mean Crete, not Cyprus. The Axis never attempt to invade Cyprus. 87. Italy attacking Greece, and getting their ass handed to them, is a lesser talked about major fuck-up of WW2. Even Hitler, renowned for being the worst decision-maker possible, instantly realized Italy had fucked up. 88. Mongols did okay with that plan. Has successfully sieges in the winter too. Although I am guessing they benefited from the medieval warm period. 89. To be fair, the Mongols are the exceptions to most historical truisms. 90. Mongols are also from a very harsh climate though. 91. And they were just straight up the best army in human history, with the technology they had at the time. 92. To start a land war in Asia. 93. But only slightly less well known is this: never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. 94. It's one of the classic blunders. 95. Leaving that cave all those years ago? That was a nice place, been downhill ever since. 96. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place. And some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 97. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. 97. Our ancestor crawling out of the ocean onto land. 98. Yeah, I wish I could go back and tell that fish it's not worth it. Stay in the ocean, brew? We could all be blowing bubbles and swimming with dolphins and shit RN, but instead I'm working a 9 to 5 and worrying about my goddamn deductibles. 99. ExxonMobil deciding to completely ignore their internally conducted research in the 1970s that near perfectly predicted the climate crisis. Because money? Edit. I should update clarify because it's not entirely correct that they did nothing. They took this information and funded massive anti-scientific disinformation campaigns to misdirect the global public on climate change. Thank you to the users who pointed out this missing detail. 100. This one particularly pisses me off because even from a selfish standpoint, this was dumb. I mean, fair play, keep it on the DL for a bit, but only so you can become the provider of carbon-free energy. Like, why wouldn't you spend 5 years secretly developing wind, solar, hydro and nuclear programs, then drop your climate news and lobby the government to put every other oil giant out of business unless they buy your stuff? It seems like a no-brainer to me. 101. Because the amount of money needed to invest in that is astronomical, and the timeline was most assuredly more than 5 years. Hell, we still don't have the most efficient methods for a lot of renewables. Cheaper and less risky to keep being the best at extracting hydrocarbons. 102. And I'll be dead by then anyway. Dead ExxonMobil CEO. 103. Not buying a painting from Hitler has to be up there. 104. And not admitting him to art school. 105. I believe it was Pope Innocent III who started a purge of cat populations in Europe. Then the Black Death started up in Europe soon after, partly due to exploding rodent populations. 106. Can't decide between two. If Tsar Nicholas had sided with the peasants of the Dumas instead of the nobles, there may not have been a Russian Revolution and therefore no Stalin and possibly no Cold War. If the German Reichstag decided to reject Hitler because they wouldn't be able to keep him under control, there wouldn't have been WW2. 107. I've read a lot about Tsar Nicholas and it's crazy to think about how his failures as a leader led to the Russian Revolution and everything that came of that. I read his father died earlier than anticipated, and so when Nicholas was thrust into power he wasn't ready for it, and you gotta wonder how all those major world events would have played out with a stronger and more liked, by the Russian people, leader. 108. One of the weirdest facts about his absolute monarchy is that he personally would do the paperwork for anyone getting a divorce because he would rather exercise that power than delegate it to a bureaucrat. 109. Oh shit. There was an episode of The Great that must have referenced this. Catherine makes divorce legal, then goes and sets up in the new divorce office, personally interviewing and disapproving each applicant. 110. Mrs. Hitler giving Mr. Hitler the thumbs up in August 1888. 111. Or always changing his surname from Schicklgruber to Hitler. Heil Schicklgruber wouldn't have the same effect. 112. The invention and proliferation of leaded petrol by petrol conglomerates in the early 1900s. Some estimates say it's killed over 100 million people directly or indirectly, and some estimates are far higher, raised crime worldwide for 50 years, lowered its worldwide, and poisoned the entire planet. Half the US population is said to still have too high lead levels in their body today, and it still kills 1 to 5.5 million people a year, or up to 10% of all deaths globally can be traced to lead. Fucking crazy when I learned about it. 113. Allowing lobbyists from property developers, pharmaceutical companies, legal arms dealers and a raft of other unethical companies influence government and individual politicians with money. 114. The universe being created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad decision. 115. The scramble for Africa and allowing King Leopold II to gain the Congo. 116. Salem witch trials or belief of witchcraft in the first place. Teenage girls drowned or burned to death over complete ignorance. Story time. So when plague or sickness used to break out, everyone seemed to be getting sick or dying except young women. What happened was that disease was being spread by infected rats. Most young women stayed home to clean the house, and a lot of them had cats as pets that would kill these rats and so protect these women from being infected. That's why, to this day, being a witch is always accompanied by a woman with a broom and a cat. 117. That other day when I went sock shoe. 118. Hey, look at this extremely tiny thing we realized exists. Let's split it up. 119. Julius Caesar not using bodyguards. 120. The Great Leap Forward. Mao's economic and social policies in 1960s China led to the largest famine in human history, leading to the death of 30 million people. If you look at a graph of annual world population growth rate from 1900s until today, there is a large dip at 1960 due to this. 121. The war on drugs has probably destroyed more lives than is even conceivable. It's international and potentially more costly than the world wars. 122. Rejecting a certain someone from art school. 123. Killing harem. 124. Slavery, every time it's happened. And the fact that it's still happening traumatizes and sets back generations of people and the potential impact they could have had on the world. 125. Letting J.J. Abrams direct the Star Wars sequels.